Man, that's so lame. I bought a Corrado for no reason. Ugh.
Hey everybody, Nathan Brown here with FCP Euro with another episode of Teardown. Today we're digging into one of the most iconic engines to come out of Europe, certainly the most iconic to come from Wolfsburg, the Volkswagen VR6. Now, usually these things are completely blown up when we're digging into it because somebody did something dumb, but we're not exactly sure about that today. So I've got my special guest Vin here. What are we getting into? What's the deal?
Right, so my dream since I was a kid was to have a Mark II with a 12-valve VR6 swap, and I'm finally gonna do it. And although my childhood tendency is to just slap this motor in the car, I wanted to give it an exterior refresh. But when we pulled it out of this Corrado that I bought, we learned that it was not actually an OBD1 Corrado engine. So the 70,000 mile car that I bought, which was rusty and crappy, I didn't pull apart a good Corrado, actually has an engine that we have no idea what the mileage is on it. So I figured I would do it right the first time and pull it apart and rebuild it. And I mean, at this point, the motor's like 30 years old, more than 30 years old, which is crazy. God, I was alive when it was built. And, you know, I would rather refresh it now rather than put it in the car and then have to do chains and pull the transmission and do everything again. So it's kind of like a buy once, cry once type situation. So
do it the right way. So thankfully, we actually have an expert here to help us with this. Aaron Davis, our Audi Catalog Manager, is here. He's a VR6 enthusiast. He's got a Mark IV-R that he loves and hates at the same time.
Yeah, luckily, if you own a VR6, you have to be a VR6 specialist.
Right, that's true. So yeah, I see that it's got a 2.9 manifold. I'm really curious to see what we find here. Let's get it up in the air. Let's dig into it.
Yeah. I think I would take the trans off first, but we don't have, what's your plan?
I was gonna take the intake manifold off and stuff first and get it as light as possible.
Yeah, let's go.
Because the transmission's heavy.
Wait, you're not gonna use it? You're gonna use a manual tool?
Oh yeah, just to crack them loose.
I don't trust this guy already. My favorite part about this is that even out of the car, the transmission looks hard to get to all the bolts. And I remember doing these in the car.
Oh yeah, no,
It's terrible.
It's terrible. Yeah. It's not fun.
Yeah, let's pull this thing off.
The intake air temp sensor. Vacuum. Woohoo!
This is one thing we noticed when we popped the engine cover off, is that from the top, we saw this little weld area right here, and that's not stock. So something that they used to do back in the day was create what they call the 2.9 liter manifold.
Well, it is a 2.9 manifold, but they'll cut it open and then they'll port the intake runners, the idea being that you get more flow and more power.
Yeah.
But basically, it almost doesn't matter what you do to an NAVR, you basically make 10 horsepower. So the turbo motors, you would maybe make a little more, but yeah, a lot of times these will end up cracking and you get a massive intake air leak on the car.
Yeah, so this is crazy that they already did that on an otherwise stock engine, so it'll be interesting to see if we find anything else there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and honestly, this looks fairly well done. Like,
it looks pretty nice.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, it looks like it had some sort of fuel leak or something. It's got like some fuel stain spray kind of all over it, but we'll see. Also a lot of oil.
There's kind of a lot of oil there, actually.
Yeah. All right, well, let's see what we find in this thing.
Yeah, the plastic valve covers are OBD2. Metal valve cover is OBD1.
Because you could polish valve covers and stuff and you'd get it
all
yeah.
all polished up in the engine bay at Waterfest, dying in 100-degree heat. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing I always trip on with these VRs is that if you had to replace the secondary air pump while in the car, this has to be a disaster. Like, I don't even know how to unbolt it, and it's out of the car, and the intake manifold's off, and it's still buried.
Yeah, you basically take the front end of the car off and have to try to gain access to it. Yeah. Manifold has to come off.
It's so packed in there. Like, it's just so much stuff just like crammed in such a tight spot.
I mean, 12 valve is, a VR, 6-cylinder engine designed to fit where a 4-cylinder normally would, so
yeah, it's true.
Maximize the space.
Yeah, I always joke that like if you're a Volkswagen, if you grew up in Volkswagens, you end up being a really good tech because your car is so unreliable and it's so difficult to work on that you get really good at being,
Yeah, like everything I know is literally because I had to know it. Yeah, like I couldn't afford to pay anybody to do it. Like I had to do it myself.
Look at how just crusty those are. Those exhaust manifolds are so ugly.
New York style. East Coast style, I should say.
A little nervous here for these.
For anyone who doesn't live on the East Coast or have worked on a car from the East Coast, It's one of those things where removing the exhaust manifold bolts could be the whole day. And you plan to do more, but you're only doing that today.
Well, you're gonna break one, and then maybe maybe if you're lucky, you can drill it out.
Yeah, I'm praying.
There we go.
Vacuum. These are coming out great. Look at them, no problem.
The infamous coil pack. These would crack and fail constantly on cars. VR with misfires is gonna be one of the main things you're replacing. They kind of deal with a lot of heat and vibration and do not live long. And these, I think, were introduced in '93, and the car that you bought was in '93, right?
It was, yeah.
I mean, it's cooked, but it's not bad. It's not cracked. Usually on these, when you're pulling them apart, when they start to misfire, all the plastic will start to crack, and then water gets inside. So like if you have a VR, it'd be totally fine while you're running and running down the road, and then you get a rainstorm, and then the thing misfires and wants to break down.
I've had that, yeah, for sure. Luckily, this thing does run pretty good. Oh, that sounds great. Just gotta clear it out a little bit.
Italian tune-up?
Honestly, it sounds better. It had a little bit of like cold start smoke, but the car has also been sitting a lot, so I was like, it might just be a condensation in the exhaust or something, but overall, I mean, it ran somewhat strong.
There you go.
Man, look at this gasket. This is like the most hilarious gasket.
I love how it's a little built-in heat shield.
Yeah, it's huge. Oh, it's for the knock sensor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If you own a Volkswagen of any kind, generally speaking, you want to have these spring clamp pliers for all of the coolant lines, because basically you can try and use regular pliers on this. It's probably you're gonna hurt yourself, hurt your fingers, hurt the clamp, but you squeeze it and it locks, and then you're good to go. And these are better than screw clamps because it provides perfect tension on the hose without crushing it.
What is this? Is this where the distributors were?
No, the distributor is in the head. Intermediate shaft, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's the intermediate shaft.
Gotcha.
So it should be, because timing chains go down, and then there's the sprocket here, and then from here down to the crank.
Oh, nice. I've actually never done timing chains on a VR.
It's simple, but not fun, because like you're saying, trying to do this in a car,
Oh,
pulling the
horrible.
transmission, trying to get everything here, and it's like been shoehorned into a Mark II or something.
It's so tight. I've done tons of 1AT timing belts, but even that is like, the timing belt is here and the frame rail is here. Yeah. So you're like, it's still a pretty like tight job.
This is the first version of Volkswagen and Audi making really poor decisions of sandwiching the timing chains between the transmission and the engine block.
Yeah.
Like, B6, B7 S4s, any of the modern Audi V8s, W12s.
All right, so we've got most of the engine torn down. The next step is we'll get this thing up on like a crane, and then we'll pull the trans off, and then we'll put it on an engine stand. So we could pull off the cylinder head and see what we're looking at with the bottom end. Hopefully the bottom end is in good condition and we could just refresh the head, put a new head gasket on, and then slap this thing back together. But we'll see.
Some swirls. It's not unusual to have a lot of debris in a transmission or a lot of like swirls, but I mean, the fluid's a little scuzzy, but there's no drama really.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna take this one out, Nate, okay?
Oh, come on. Easy peasy.
Yeah, it's a little light transmission.
They're really not bad, and it's got that nice bracket, a little holding bracket. Yeah, and so on all the O2A, O2J, you have an external slave out here that pushes on this little arm here. This is what's physically pivoting and depressing the clutch to disengage it. So you replace the release bearing here, and you can actually get these arms new-ish. Is it a Mark III?
It's a Mark III trans. CDM is Corrado. That's the 365. Man, that's so lame. I bought a Corrado for no reason. We got an OBD2 engine and we got a GTI transmission, which basically the GTI and the Jettas, they came with a longer ring and pinion, so it had a 3.33. The Corrado came with a slightly shorter ring and pinion, the 365. The reason why shorter ring and pinion is really good in these cars is because they don't make a lot of power.
No.
Probably make like 150 wheel or A?
It depends on the engine. So that's the
Yeah.
weird thing about VR. So like you could have a stock VR that makes 145. You could have a stock VR that makes 175. I've seen both. Like I've dynoed a gazillion of them at the shop.
That's crazy.
And you could put $5,000 in parts into an NA car and make 10 more horsepower or 20 more horsepower. Everyone's different.
Yeah, so, but
they don't make a lot of power.
that like not high horsepower range, short gearing makes it feel really exciting. So I would still want to see if I could maybe just change the ring and pinion. If we're gonna do a diff, it all got to come apart anyway. So I don't know, we'll see.
I mean, it'd definitely rip. Like on Mark II, the VR, especially with the short gearing, would be a blast.
This is a feat of Volkswagen engineering. There is one more intake manifold bolt, and it is behind the tensioner. That intake manifold bolt means if you have to take the lower intake manifold off, you have to take off the accessories, the alternator, and the bracket just to get to that one last one. It's phenomenal. If you want your kids to learn how to work on cars real good, get them a Volkswagen to start with. Dude, they just went ham on the RTV. This is nuts.
Got everything torn off the engine now, and it actually looks a hell of a lot smaller than it did before. So as we mentioned, this is basically designed to go where a 4-cylinder engine normally went. So it is a V6, but it is a singular head, inline, narrow angle, so 15-degree angle, and all the cylinders are all offset. So because of that, that's why you have these odd-shaped intake ports in the head.
Yeah, and once we pull the head off, you'll actually be able to see the positioning of the pistons, and it's kind of crazy. It's just like a staggered 6-cylinder. So rather than being in a straight line, they're just like slightly offset, which is why the VR6 is one of the most unique sounding engines.
100%. It sounds awesome. And then with this here, you have to talk about this. What is this?
This is called a crack pipe,
Probably not that politically correct.
and it does just that, is it cracks and then it leaks. So they make metal versions, but this is a huge problem on these cars is the plastic thermostat housing and crack pipe are known to leak over time. And as you just saw, all of the stuff that we took off, it's a disaster to get to, so it's definitely something we're going to address before we put this back in the car.
Yeah, basically that water pump that you just took off feeds all the water for the engine through here. So when this breaks off, which is one of the kind of like common, probably won't break now that I'm trying to do it.
It looks fairly new. Like this looks like it was replaced.
It actually does look new.
Yeah.
But that'll break, and if that breaks, instant coolant loss. You're on the side of the highway.
But yeah, other than that, I mean, the engine is super dirty, filthy, but we got it all pretty much torn down. I think the last thing we want to do is pull off the cylinder head, see what we're working with in there. I really want to see how the cylinders are looking because it did have a little bit of smoke on startup. So looking at the cylinder walls, we'll be able to see if it's got any like scoring, glazing, whatever, because the car did sit for like almost 10 years. So
Could be fine.
yeah, might be all right. Might be okay. The clutch is pretty new.
Yeah.
Looks fine. We'll throw that back in.
Yeah, so rear main seal leaking on this, that's super common on these cars. So probably been leaking for a while, which is why the bell housing is so just full of crud.
Filled with it, dude. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
So pretty much anytime, I mean, this kind of goes for every car, but if you're doing a clutch, just do a rear main seal, because otherwise you're just gonna do it again in like 6 months.
Whoa, those are crusty.
Yeah, they're not lean at least, but
They're old.
definitely that.
Well, we'll be excited to see what the cylinder head looks like when we pull this thing off.
I mean, so the other way to tell it's OBD2, as if we didn't already know, is that it has a single timing chain at the top, whereas the earlier cars have a single on the bottom and a double on the top.
Oh, wow.
And some of the other differences, these have single valve springs instead of dual. So when you're doing cams or high performance stuff, you always want to upgrade those, change the seats and stuff, but that's like super easy to get from like Tectonics.
Yeah, yeah.
So typically on these, when you get a failure on a timing chain guide, it's going to be on this fixed one. If I recall correctly, it's been a while.
Right, the big plastic one, cracks.
It'll typically crack and break, and that's where you start to get all your play. I mean, this one,
That's just the tensioner one.
it's pretty new actually. There's not even a groove on it,
Nice.
like at all. So
So the chain doesn't look that bad.
yeah, for sure.
Maybe the chains were done when they did the, because I mean, if they, yeah, because they did all the silicone everywhere. Yeah, they're definitely not OEM. So basically, I guess what happens, right, is like not only does it make noise, but once this breaks and you lose tension, it could start to lose timing in the cams, right? So it doesn't necessarily break like a timing belt where you'll like have piston to valve contact, but your motor will lose like a ton of performance, right?
It can jump far enough that you will have actual contact and bend valve. The other thing you have to look out for on these is this intermediate shaft sprocket. These teeth will get very, very worn. So this is oftentimes on high mile cars, you'd need to replace it. And that one actually looks really, really clean. So it's either been replaced or it's fairly decently serviced, or at least not all that high mileage.
It's actually pretty interesting because now that this is all apart, like it's really complicated to get to this, but once you're there, it's a pretty simple timing chain setup. Yeah. Whereas I've seen ones that are much more complex with multiple gears and like changeovers and stuff. It's pretty simple. It's just a shame that it's buried. Yeah. Like buried. Yeah. I mean, we've had the motor out of the car and it still took us hours to get to it.
Yeah. And the other thing is of course, the head gaskets, which do leak on these cars.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, Volkswagen extended the head gasket to the timing chain cover.
Yeah, I don't understand this.
So one of the big things that will happen is that if you send a head out to get done and you don't send the timing cover and you just do the head, it doesn't fit. No. So you have to send the timing cover out with the head for everything to be resurfaced together. Otherwise, it's
oh right,
yeah. Do it again. Yeah.
Dude, that's horrible.
Found that out the hard way once.
I'm sure there's many people out there who have done that the hard way. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Doesn't look that bad.
It's not too bad, but I think the actual gear here I think this looks a little bit worn down. I mean, we should put a new one in regardless.
Yeah, do the timing chain sets come with like the cogs, or is it just chains and guides?
Just chains and guides.
Just chains and guides. And honestly, like at a certain point, you're like, if anything is even a bit worn, like it's so much work to do it that why wouldn't you change it?
100%.
Yeah.
Like what's another $100 or something?
So I mean, just kind of like objectively looking at this, they're not really very worn in. Obviously, there's an awful lot of sludge buildup, and I'm surprised to see the internals in as good a shape as they are, given the amount of sludge on the studs. So these are all the lifters or cam followers, whatever you want to call it. These are hydraulics, so they're oil filled, and they're the same on every 12 valve, 8 valve, 16 valve Volkswagen. So cams look good. All the head surfaces all look pretty good. Like there's no galling or anything like that, but there is an insane amount of sludge on all the studs, so much that we had to like use the dead blow to like get the cam caps loose. So somehow everything is totally fine, but there's crazy sludge.
That's crazy. But the casting on the cylinder head's pretty dark, so I think that indicates like pretty long oil change intervals, right?
Yeah. Like somebody's using some like 10W30 standard oil.
Yeah, and changing it every like 8,500 miles.
But yeah, that's a lot of varnishing.
So do we change the lifters or no?
100%.
Yeah, we're gonna put new ones in.
All new. So like anytime you're doing something like this, we're gonna do all the new lifters, depending on what you get from Tectonics for cams and stuff like that. New valve springs, retainers, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, one of the things that's kind of weird about VR is it's a totally flat cylinder head surface. All the combustion chamber is in the pistons inside of the actual engine. And so you'll see the valves actually stick out from their seats, and that's normal. Like, so the exhaust valves sitting the way that they sit is all pretty normal. So kind of impossible to tell if it's been done before. Probably not, if I had to guess. Like coolant passageways, everything looks fine. Like really not a big deal. Good to go.
So the cylinders otherwise look pretty good. I mean, do we just hit it with like a hone to put some cross hatching on there and take care of the carbon?
Probably. I mean, there's no like actual issues that I can see, right?
Right.
There's no obvious scuff marks, no anything. We can crack, take the pistons out and stuff like that and like check all the bearings and everything else. But while we're in here,
That's the title of the video.
Yeah.
And while we're in here, I'm just gonna do a quick gasket refresh on this VR6 and toss it right in.
I mean, so while the engine's out of that car, I mean, the engine bay is gonna be nice and wide open.
No, that's where the scope creep stops. The engine bay stays 100% stock, cleaned up, motor goes in.
Just an idea.
Listen, we're gonna do a shave bay wire tuck. That car is gonna be here until the end of time.
So this is the original composite head gasket. So we're gonna be doing a Mark IV VR6 head gasket, which is metallic, multi-layer, and thinner, and it'll raise compression and give more performance. But this is actually a good sign that it's the original one versus one that's already been replaced. So I doubt the head's ever been off the car.
It is actually pretty interesting how it's like a flat cylinder head and then just the piston relieves the area.
I think it's honestly one of the reasons why they're so tricky to build reliably and do like make good power with, NA especially, but like built VRs blow up almost as easily as like stock VRs when like put turbos on them and stuff.
Right.
On the outside, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pull off the oil cooler, oil filter housing, and then we're gonna get inside a little bit, right?
Yep, we're gonna check the internals, make sure the cylinder walls aren't scored. We're gonna check the main cap bearings and also the rod bearings as well. So really looking forward to cracking this thing open.
Yeah, after that, we take it to the machine shop, get everything kind of cleaned up, and then hopefully get everything back nice and spick and span and ready to go back in the car. And currently pulling the oil cooler off. These are pretty common gaskets to leak on a VR. There's two of them. There's one that goes on this side of this housing or bolt fastener. This is a square one, and then the classic used on every single Volkswagen ever gasket goes between this cooler and the block. Generally speaking, I prefer to use genuine on these if you can. That's because you basically replace it. And if you use genuine, you generally are not gonna have a problem with it. If you don't use genuine, I've seen problems with it start to leak again in like a year or so. And maybe that's changed, it's been a little while, but that's one area where I almost always try to use genuine is high pressure, high temperature oil gaskets like on this. There's not a lot that can actually fail on these that will 100% take you out of running. There's obviously the coolant pipe on the front. If the engine speed sensor dies, the engine will not run and it will do some funky stuff. So
I've actually had it when my car turned off, when it overheated. Yep. Because it's right there and it gets very hot. The engine does not know what to do because it's not getting the proper signal. So the engine will turn off.
I think you might have to lift a little bit to get the bolt out, and then we'll just slowly let it rotate around. This is actually really not that bad.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be a lot more sketchier.
How's it look?
Doesn't look that bad.
Supposedly it was like 78,000 miles. That's not bad at all.
It's not terrible for what I expected for it to look like.
Especially with the sludge it has and stuff. So we're just hammering these like Tommy Noble, Johnny Hammersticks. And we're just gently tapping out the rod and piston assembly. There's definitely sludge on the oil control ring.
Yeah.
So of the rings, you basically have 3 rings on a piston. There's the 2 compression rings. You want these gaps to be offset from each other, basically to help everything seal appropriately. And then you have your oil control ring, that's the bottom ring. So basically what happens is the piston goes up, and as it comes down, that oil control ring is supposed to scrape the oil off the cylinder walls. And what'll happen is if you don't change your oil often enough, or use a very low quality oil, this will gunk up and sludge up and basically stick. And then you'll start to get oil getting past the oil control ring, and that's where you start to burn oil in the engine, start to consume oil. So if you are having that problem, this is what the Liqui-Moly engine flush is actually acting on that helps improve the performance of the engine and reduce oil consumption. All right, so we've got all 6 pistons out. They generally looked okay. There's a little bit of scuffing on a few of them that's a little bit concerning, so we want to check the cylinder walls. Bearings were generally okay somewhere, nothing too crazy. Like 1 or 2 had a spot where maybe a speck of dirt got into it. Yep. And now we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pull some of these main bearing caps, see what we're gonna see. I'm not really expecting to find much damage.
Yeah, I don't think, after seeing the connecting rod bearings, I'm sure the main cap bearings are gonna be just as the same as the connecting rods.
Yep, so I'll pull a few of those and see what we got. There's a little bit of wear. There's, again, some evidence where maybe a little piece of dirt or debris got caught in there at one point in time. Nothing's smoked on this engine at all. Like the other thing that we're not seeing is any hot spots, right?
Yes.
There's no bluing on any of the journals or anything at all. Okay, so essentially you have your crank sitting in here, and these bearings or thrust washers, whatever you want to call them, are basically there to locate the crank and keep it tight. So when you replace the main bearings, you're also going to replace these thrust bearings. So whenever you hear the term crank walk, or which is common in certainly in the Mitsubishi world, but you'll see it in some Volkswagen Audi stuff in the Gen 3 TSIs, they reference it all the time. What that generally means is that these thrust washers or these thrust bearings have worn out, and the crank is literally walking back and forth because these are not there to keep everything tight. So what we have right here is the oil pump drive shaft that comes from the intermediate shaft up here. So intermediate shaft is driven by the timing chain system that goes over to this little bevel box, and that goes down to this little itty bitty, teeny tiny, less than a pencil thick shaft that drives the oil pump. So a little terrifying to think about. This is actually what's keeping your engine alive, because this is not very big. It's like 5 mil.
It's about 5 millimeters driving your oil pump.
So it's 7,000 RPMs or 6,800, whatever you're running this thing to. That's the only thing keeping the engine alive. But obviously it works. It usually lasts. So essentially what we're going to do is now that we have the pistons out, we're going to inspect the cylinder walls to see if there's any scuffing of the actual block that will match the scuffing that we're seeing on the pistons. It's not likely to be all that bad because obviously this is a cast iron block versus an aluminum piston. The aluminum is going to wear much more quickly, but it's still something you want to make sure there's no major damage before you send all the parts to the machine shop. All right, so here we are. We've pretty much got this thing torn down. It was not as bad as it could be.
Not as bad. A little bit further than just a quick gasket change on it, but
yeah.
Here we are.
I mean, basically, once you see the RTV, once you start seeing some, I'm going to say signs of neglect, but sort of less than ideal things going on.
Right.
Time to dig deeper.
Yeah, I'm happy we ended up pulling the thing apart. We found actually a couple things that were wrong with it that would have been a bummer to put back in the car.
But yeah, so next steps on this, I mean, there's actually no RTV in the oil pan somehow. Some sludge, but that's about it.
It's got some sludge.
Cylinder walls look fairly decent. Like everything's like, at this point, we're just gonna do everything, right? Like rod bearings and rehone the cylinders.
Might as well. We're a couple bolts away from doing rod bearings, pulling the pistons, give them a quick hone. There is a bunch of carbon buildup, so I think it'd be better to just do it. But fun part is, I get to go home. So your problem now.
We'll take care of it for you. Not a lot that came off going back on the car. New clutch, new flywheel, lightweight on that.
Yeah.
All new water pump, all the crack pipe, and all the different coolant parts. So.
And this is where scope creep happens some more. Maybe we'll do some cams, valve springs.
I mean, you might as well. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just leave my credit card here. I'll go home and yada, 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 come back to a nice built motor.
Sounds good.
Overall, I'm super happy that we're gonna take all the steps to freshen this thing up because I really want this car to come out perfect, and it's cool that we're gonna just make this engine like 100%. So if you wanna watch the whole swap process, it's gonna be on my YouTube channel, but if you wanna learn everything about the VR6, go to these guys.
Yep, so check it out. We're gonna do the rest of the teardown, do the rebuild. If you enjoyed the video, hope you did. Hit a thumbs up, hit a like, hit a subscribe. If you have any questions or comments or why VRs are the best or the worst, put it in the comments below, and we'll see you later on.